right, everybody, welcome back. It's great to have you for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at a pretty significant story that's been developing and trying to kind of break it down so you don't have to wade through all the noise yourself.
Exactly.
So this one revolves around an upcoming event that is a planned phone call between former President Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. And the subject of this phone call, according to CBS News, who's reporting on, this is the war in Ukraine.
Right.
And this call is apparently set for Tuesday, so pretty soon here. And what we're going to be looking at in this deep dive is kind of what led up to this, what we know about the potential content of this call and what the implications might be for you.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really important to look at the context here because, any conversation between these two leaders is going to have global repercussions. And obviously this war in Ukraine has been raging for quite some time.
Absolutely. It's been a major point of global attention and concern for a while now. And so to have these two world leaders potentially having a direct conversation about it, it's definitely something worth paying attention to. So let's just jump right in. From what Trump has said publicly, it sounds like this call is really stemming from his desire to bring the war to an end.
Right.
He used that phrase specifically, bring that war to an end. And you have to remember, this is after 3 years of really intense fighting following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine back in 2022.
Right.
So, it's been a protracted conflict, and he seemed pretty optimistic about it, too. He said, maybe we can, maybe we can't, but I think we have a very good chance.
Yeah, well, that's certainly a confident statement.
Yeah, it is. And coming from him, it's certainly something to kind of raise an eyebrow at. And what's interesting is that the Kremlin has confirmed this, so it's not just Trump saying this.
Yeah, Dmitry Peskov, their spokesperson, actually acknowledged that this call was planned on Monday morning. Didn't give us too many details, but did confirm that it's happening.
So we've got both sides saying this is on the books.
Yeah, seems so.
Okay. So something else that's important to note here is that the timing of this call is pretty interesting because it comes right on the heels of a meeting in Saudi Arabia where delegates from both the U.S. and Ukraine, they put forward a proposal for a 30-day ceasefire.
Right.
And CBS is reporting that Putin's initial reaction to this was he accepted the idea of a ceasefire in principle.
Okay.
And he said this during a news conference in Moscow last week, so this is all very recent.
Right.
But, as is often the case with these very, very, sensitive and delicate negotiations, an initial acceptance isn't the same as a done deal.
Yeah, and he didn't actually commit to anything. He just said he accepted it in principle.
Right.
And really he emphasized that more discussions were needed, and specifically he made sure to say that we need to talk to our American colleagues and partners of it seems like they see the U.S. as playing a key role in this whole thing.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, it really kind of frames this upcoming call as a potential turning point.
Absolutely.
Right, because if they're looking to the U.S. to be that kind of mediating or influencing force, then this conversation between Trump and Putin could be really, really important.
It could be the key to unlocking further progress.
Right. And it sounds like there's been a little bit of groundwork laid already because the report mentioned that President Trump's special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, he actually met with Putin last week.
He did.
And his assessment of that meeting was pretty positive. He said, we made a lot of progress.
Oh, wow.
And he even went so far as to say that he thinks the gap between Ukraine and Russia has narrowed significantly since before the inauguration.
Well, that's a pretty bold statement. I mean, he's suggesting that, there's been some real movement.
Right. And he seems pretty optimistic about this upcoming call, too, because he said he expects it to be very positive and constructive, between the two men, between the two presidents.
Interesting. I mean, it almost sounds like he's privy to some information that we're not. Like maybe there's something going on behind the scenes diplomatically that we haven't seen publicly yet.
Yeah, that's possible for sure. But, it's also worth noting that, what one side sees as progress, another side might see as, a concession or a setback.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's really all about perspective and how, each side is kind of framing these developments.
Right. And we have to remember that both sides are trying to achieve their own objectives here. So what might look like progress to one side might be seen very differently by the other.
For sure. Okay, so now let's kind of dig into what we think this call might actually cover. Trump himself gave us a little bit of insight into this. He said that the discussions would involve specific assets.
Okay.
And he even gave some examples. He talked about land and power plants, and he specifically emphasized power plants as a big question. So
that brings up some really interesting questions, right? Because when we're talking about assets in the context of this conflict,
Yeah.
it's pretty clear that territorial disputes are going to be a major part of that conversation.
Right.
But the fact that he mentioned power plants specifically,
Right.
and particularly, with the Zaporizhia plant being such a major concern, that adds a whole other layer of complexity to this.
Yeah, the Zaporizhia plant is Europe's largest nuclear power plant, and it's been a major point of concern throughout this conflict because of the potential for a disaster.
Right. And you're talking about not just territorial control, but also the security of really critical infrastructure that has implications for, a huge swath of the world.
Absolutely. And Trump even went on to say something else that was really pretty significant. He said that they're already talking about dividing up certain assets.
Oh, wow.
And he said that both Ukraine and Russia have been working on that. So that suggests that there's a level of negotiation or at least consideration of these divisions that's already happening.
Right. And that's something that, we haven't necessarily seen reported on widely. So if that's true, it could be a pretty big development.
Yeah, it could indicate a shift in the dynamics of the conflict.
Absolutely. And, for you, the listener, the big question here is, what does this mean for Ukraine's sovereignty? Are they going to be able to maintain their territorial integrity if these discussions are happening without their full consent?
Right. And to really understand what's at stake here, we have to go back and look at the history of this conflict.
Okay.
A CBS report reminds us that Russia launched this full-scale invasion of Ukraine back in 2022, and they went on to illegally annex 4 Ukrainian regions.
Yeah, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia.
Exactly. And it's important to note that Russia doesn't fully control all of these regions.
Right. Declaring annexation and actually having control on the ground are two very different things.
Yeah, and we can't forget about Crimea either, which Russia annexed from Ukraine back in 2014.
Right. That was really the beginning of this whole conflict.
Yeah, exactly. And so all of these territorial claims are really at the heart of what this war is about. And any talk of dividing up land is going to be extremely sensitive and potentially explosive.
It's getting very difficult to find a solution that satisfies everyone involved.
And then you layer on top of that the strategic importance of some of these areas, like Zaporizhia, for example, with the nuclear power plant.
Right. It's not just about land. It's about critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
And the potential for a disaster that could affect the entire region.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's kind of pull all of this together for everyone listening. We have this scheduled phone call between former President Trump and President Putin. It's set for Tuesday. It comes after this proposed 30-day ceasefire that Putin accepted in principle but wants to discuss further with the U.S.
Yeah.
There's been some prior diplomatic engagement already, and it sounds like this conversation is going to focus on dividing up specific assets, including land and power plants. And this all, sits within the context of trying to end this war in Ukraine, a war that began with Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, but really has its roots in the annexation of Crimea back in 2014 and the more recent annexations of these other Ukrainian regions.
Exactly. So you have a very, very complex situation here. A lot of history, a lot of ongoing conflict, and now potentially some movement towards a negotiated settlement.
Right. And for you, the listener, as you're thinking about all of this, consider the immense challenges involved in trying to negotiate an end to a conflict like this.
Yeah, one that's been going on for so long and is so deeply rooted in these issues of territorial sovereignty.
Exactly. Think about the different perspectives that each side brings to the table. Ukraine, Russia, the U.S.
And what are their priorities? What are they willing to compromise on?
Yeah. Right. And what are the potential consequences of any decisions that are made, especially when you're talking about something as fundamental as territorial integrity and the control of critical infrastructure like power plants.
There's a lot to consider.
It is. And it'll be interesting to see what comes out of this call on Tuesday. So stay tuned. We'll keep you updated.
For sure. This is definitely a story to watch closely.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
See ya.